our session was about hip hop as a cultural touchstone and also as an expression of trauma and resilience, particularly in African American communities. So we gave a brief overview of hip hop, the history of it, and why we brought this to this meeting, some of the significance that it has in terms of being a mouthpiece for people, being a reflection on social inequities, on it being a path to a different life for some folks, and it also being something that a lot of Black boys really strongly identify with because often those are their examples, and also as an art form, because sometimes it can get lost that this really is art, and there's a reason that it has spread around the world the way that it has. And then we went from there into showing specific videos, and then having a discussion that started off with a few discussion points from our panelists, but then that really the audience took from there. And we had 5 different videos. One was N.W.A. Fuck the Police. The second one was Tupac's Changes. The third was Childish Gambino's This Is America. The fourth was J. Cole's Middle Child. And we ended with DNA by Kendrick Lamar. So something that I think the audience took away from it is that the perspectives reflected in these songs are the experiences that a lot of people in certain neighborhoods and communities have contended with for decades in this country and continue to contend with. And so there's a way that there is valuable information about the lived experience of what it's like to be Black in America, whether you grew up poor and in a hyper-segregated community like Tupac and never went to college, or whether you went to college like J. Cole and were a college athlete and are dealing with sort of what it means to sort of straddle and try to still keep a foot in your home community while you're progressing in life. And so those themes of sort of entrenched social inequities, of intergenerational racial trauma, and also resilience and being able to find a way to carve out something for yourself and be artistic and expressive in spite of all that was something that came up again and again. Part of what the lyrics demonstrate too, though, is that suicidality in Black men or in certain communities doesn't look the same. It doesn't necessarily look like cutting your own wrist or having thoughts of killing yourself. It may look like reckless behaviors that put you at risk for being killed by somebody else. So the issue of suicide by cop came up, and also how often that is part of what people are talking about, but it gets sort of embedded in all of these other things. But when it comes to women and trauma, we often talk about borderline personality disorder or those traits and the chronic suicidality you see with women who have a trauma history. We see the same thing in men who have a trauma history. It just looks different, and people get so focused on the anger or the antisocial behaviors, they miss, Tupac at the beginning of Changes talks about, is life worth living? Should I blast myself, right? He leads the entire song with this question of, is this worth continuing to try to do, or do I just end this myself and take some agency over this because I don't feel like this world is changing? It may be more socially acceptable to have this compensatory grandiosity to cover the fear, right? And even in This Is America, again, Childish Gambino had a relatively, compared to some of the other artists we featured, nice upbringing in the suburbs of Atlanta, went to art school and all these things. But in This Is America, at the end of the video, once he stops singing and dancing, he is running, looks like he's running for his life and has this look of fear on his face, right? After he's been in this video where all these people are dying and nobody does anything about it, and people in society just keep going, right? So about what that messaging that your life is not valuable does to the Black psyche and the different ways that that can manifest itself in outward behaviors. I would sum it up as the things that were relevant themes in hip hop about inequity and trauma and the lack of opportunity, warping people's behaviors and their developmental process are still very relevant today. But that in spite of that, you have different ways that people have figured out to survive and to cope. And so hip hop being one of them, that you had this thing that was part of the community that is now this worldwide phenomenon, but it came out of resilience, right? And the ways that despite all of these challenges, all of these entrenched inequities, people are figuring out a way to still create community for themselves, to find ways to have pride in who they are, to construct a narrative that's not completely dependent on the more predominant narrative about who you are, what you can do, or whether or not you should be proud of where you come from and what you look like. Yeah, and even just to understand why somebody may respond to you a certain way, right? So if you're in a community where institutions have repeatedly failed you, this idea that you're going to walk into a hospital or walk into the medical healthcare system and assume that it has your best interests at heart is not in line with their experiences of how the world has worked, right? So even just having a degree of empathy for people who have been wronged by multiple systems consistently, and how that may impact their willingness to engage with you at first, and how they may respond to you at first, and the challenges that they face in trying to get help if they realize there's an issue, and why it may be hard for them to ask for help from you.